It's challenging when you have the guests that don't really like to talk, but it's all about picking words that they're saying and having them elaborate and pushing them in a way to say like, tell me more and explain more and what made you do this. And again, trying to avoid the why questions or what did you get out of that? And how did that make you feel? That would make a normal person angry. Would that make you angry?
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we have Gabrielle, and she is sharing some really adventurous journeys of her podcast, from why she started it, what she has used her podcast for, and how she's used it to grow her business, the ways that she has learned new things and really pushed herself outside of her comfort zone to take her podcast to the next level and all the way up to being available on public access TV, which I think is so cool. So please join me in welcoming Gabrielle to the show. Hi, Gabrielle. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to chat with you. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
So my name is Gabrielle Crichlow. I'm the owner and director of my tutoring company called A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. I have a podcast in connection to that company. The podcast is called Hot Topics. And the purpose of my podcast is to highlight a variety of topics, but using an educational perspective. I usually pick topics that are maybe not as openly discussed in the educational community, I guess, for lack of a better word. So there's a lot of talk about disabilities, neurodivergence, employment, self-care, things like that. But it's also other things that have come to my attention as I meet other podcasters. And also the more public I become, the more people find me and say, hey, my guest will be good for your show, and here's what he can talk about. So I get a lot of guests, but the lens that I put my show through is all about education and teaching and having people learn about new things and learn different perspectives about different things. So while it may seem like kind of all over the place, but the idea is that you're taking in new information, you're exploring new things. It's pretty much tutoring and how it works, but in a podcast form.
Oh, I love that. So the name Hot Topics, right? Like that's definitely something that makes you think like, wait a minute, what is it about? So I love that you titled it that. When it comes to like asking those questions, because I know tends to be a question that a lot of podcasters have. And I think with you having that teaching lens, it's very easy to ask the right questions to pull out the information that you're maybe looking for. So what advice would you give someone who's like maybe struggling with the question side of their podcast, where they have hosts on and they're like, yeah, I kind of have an idea of what I want to talk about, but I'm not sure how to like set up the questions or ask the right questions. Do you have any advice for people who are struggling with that?
I would say, and then coming from a mental health counseling background, one of the things I learned is probing people. It's sort of like being a counselor in a podcast. So first of all, you're going to have different types of people. You're going to have people that are very talkative, and you're going to have people that are not. So, and you're going to have people in the middle. So you have to be mentally prepared for all kinds of people. And, that's why I like to do preliminary interviews, which is another recommendation. But you get a feel of the guest, right? So if you get a feel that the guest is going to be talkative, which is the best kind of guest, right? Because you're taking the work away from the host, right? So you just let them talk, right? And then you have the ones that are a little more challenging. in that they tend to give like short answers. So you got to pull more information out of it. So what I like to do is going back to the probing, right? So if they give a short answer, I would say questions like, what do you mean? Can you give an example? What did you do after that? What did you do after that? I try to avoid like why questions. Well, what made you do that? I remember one of my graduate school professors said when in doubt, you could always talk about feelings. So if you're ever stuck, you could always say, oh, how did that make you feel? As people, I think it's like we have a spiritual connection with other people. And I say that because we can pick up feelings and emotions. So if you get a sense of someone is angry, you can say like, oh, that makes you sound angry or you look angry. So pointing out observations and letting them either agree or deny or however you take it. So in terms of what to do is when in doubt, you could always talk about feelings. That would make me angry. Does that make you angry? So talk about feelings, asking them to explain further. What do you mean? Tell me more about that. Another thing is picking keywords and having them elaborate on that. So they may say something and you hear a word, right? Or you may hear an interesting word and you say, you said this word. What did you mean when you say that word? And then you let them say whatever they got to say. And then like, oh, what's this word? And then you let them say whatever they got to say. And then you want to, which is another counseling skill, is you want to paraphrase it or summarize it. You let them say, their few statements, and then you say, oh, so basically you did this because of A, B, C, and D. And it's putting it all together like a puzzle and then just letting them say whatever they got to say. And what are your thoughts on that? And what are your feelings on that? And that's a lot, and just being in tune with your own feelings and putting it out there as well. And like, if you say like, oh, I feel overwhelmed, like, are you getting that? Or just like, wow, or even just a simple statement like, I feel overwhelmed, and stopping it there in silence and letting them respond and see how they respond to it, So it's challenging when you have the guests that don't really like to talk, but it's all about picking words that they're saying and having them elaborate and pushing them in a way to say like, tell me more and explain more and what made you do this. And again, trying to avoid the why questions or what did you get out of that? And how did that make you feel? That would make a normal person angry. Would that make you angry? So it's feelings, keywords, probing, summarize, paraphrase. And then if it's really, really bad, just cut the interview short. It is what it is. But you did all that you can do. And then it's like, okay, I think this is as far as we can go and just kind of stop it there. But it's just having that counseling background, it plays into how I do my podcast. And so those are things that I put in when I do it. And so, and I think those are great skills that anyone can have.
You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together. Yeah. Oh, those are such great tips. Thank you so much. It's really good to give people tips and strategies that if they're feeling really overwhelmed or stressed out by the idea of like, this guest is not really giving any feedback, or it's a little harder pulling information from them. Those questions you gave are great examples. Thank you so much. Before we get into how you're using your podcast to lead people to your business and to talk about your business, and I do want to talk also about some of the media coverage that you've gotten recently and how you kind of went about doing that with your podcast. Before we get into all that fun stuff, because it's going to be great. When you started your podcast, what were kind of like the thoughts or feelings going into your podcast and why you decided to start a podcast when you did?
it just came to me. I just get these ideas in my head. It was, the middle of the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, and my business is pretty much like almost shut down at this point because my services were in person. And so that ground to a halt, and I was forced to pivot online. And I think in exploring the different technologies that were out there. So exploring Zoom, I heard Zoom is, the hot thing. And so I tried Zoom and I was just blown away by it. Like, wow, like there's a whiteboard and you could screen share and it's just like you could record video and audio and, they put the files in your, and I was just like, there's so many things I could do with this. And it was one of the goals that I had because a friend of mine, like maybe a couple of years ago, had me write on my goals. And, one of it was like, I'd love to have a television show or some kind of TV show or some sort of YouTube show where like you just kind of give it to your kids and say, here, watch this. You don't want to be bothered. And it's just like, I want one of those shows. So fast forward, a few years later, which is around the pandemic time, I discovered Zoom and I was just like, and there's another thing. My computer has this basic video editing program that I just so happened to discover. And I was like, oh, this is pretty simple. Okay. So I kind of had the idea in my head and I already had my YouTube channel. And I thought, I'm just going to run with it and see where this goes. I was talking to a friend of mine who has a daycare center. I was telling her my ideas and she's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm like, hey, do you want to be a guest? And she's like, I never thought you asked. I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I'll talk about it because she was my very first guest. And we talked about how she was evaluated for learning disabilities at 53. And what was it like having ADHD and dyslexia and finding out late in life. So we talked about that and that kind of led her to be on my show 4 more times after that. And then I put out a call to a Facebook group I was in, like, I'd love to talk about this. Who wants to get on? And, people were coming on and it just picked up after that. And I hooked up with like a podcast recruiter and he was bringing in guests to me and I was paying him for it. And then I decided, you know what, I think I could just do this on my own. So I joined a bunch of podcasting groups and built from there. And the more public I made it, it was people even coming to me saying, I want to get on your show. So it kind of just picked up from there. I was strictly doing video and then someone found me and said, hey, think about doing audio, which is again one of those ideas in my head. I was like, okay, I have to take my videos and convert to audio. And that was a whole process. But I actually found this great program that did it in the free trial. So I did that through his company. But then in looking at how he was doing it, I just felt my company wasn't represented very well. And it was his name, in the description and not my name. And so that bothered me. And I just decided, I really want my name out there and it's my company, it's my name. And I also didn't like how he was handling things. So I decided to leave and I just pretty much had to start over and put in all those episodes and all the descriptions. And so I finally got it together and he put me on Spreaker, which is where I'm at now. And I was like, whatever, I'll just stick it out with Spreaker. I'm here. I also like that they insert ads into the shows. But I could have just dropped the audio part. But I was like, I really want to continue this because I see the benefit of the audio part in that you can listen to it in your car. And it seems to be the audio part seems more popular than the video part. So I decided to incorporate that segment into my podcast. And I think even before I was just calling it a web series, but then I added that audio part and then I was like, I can call it a podcast now. It's no longer a web series. And so I actually changed the name of my show because I added the audio element. And so now I can officially call myself a podcaster and not a web series person. But yeah, it was just something I wanted to do. Oh, and I also wanted a platform where I can openly discuss issues and put it out there and things that people don't really dive into. So having a talk about disabilities, like what's it like having ADHD and what does that look like? What's it like having dyslexia? What's it like having dyscalculia? And just even in this journey, exploring what is a podcast. So I had someone come on there and talk about like, what is podcasting? And I actually brought up that subject 5 or 6 times at this point. So, and talking with different podcasters and like, what is it and why is it so popular? So it's things that I want to explore, and having the opportunity to put things out in the open. I think that's the direction that I wanted to take my show and integrate it into my business in a way to bring people to my business, one, but also to give another side of it where it's, you see my face, you hear my voice, and I'm bringing other people on and promoting their businesses and their shows. And in this journey, I've built a network of a lot of different people as well. So it's definitely helped me with networking. But I think because of the pandemic and being forced to really delve myself into the video chat world and exploring all these different things, like, oh, I could just take the Zoom video and put it up on YouTube and there it is. Because it's so easy to just make a show. It's easy to take the video and upload it to YouTube or Facebook Live, or even just to do a Facebook Live, a Facebook Live, an Instagram Live. Now Twitter has a live now, a YouTube Live. It's so easy to just make these shows and make this content. And why do we need TV when we ourselves can be the content? All this stuff is out there. It's just to go do it. I think because of the height of the pandemic and having the technology to do it, and discovering the video making program on my computer, and I evolved into StreamYard, and StreamYard has all the pretty bells and whistles, and even that is a financial investment, but it's like, even that definitely helped a lot. I think because I wanted to highlight a lot of issues on my show and have that open discussion and have that open dialogue and have people tell their stories, and even questions that I wanted to ask, but I never knew like where to find the information. And if someone out there can answer my question, having that dialogue. So having my own questions answered and having an open dialogue and putting this information out there, having an open space, I think that's something that I wanted to make for my show. And I think that podcasting, it gave me the space to do that.
I love your story so much because it really shows like the perseverance, right? That it really takes to have a podcast. And like you said, yes, anyone can do it, but it really does take effort, and it takes you saying, I'm going to show up today for this, even though I might not feel like it. It's happening. This is happening today. And so I love that your journey really shows that, and that you did have the wherewithal, is probably the only word that I can think of right now, but the wherewithal to say, look, this doesn't feel aligned. This relationship with this other person who is putting their name in front of my stuff doesn't feel good and isn't really aligned with my values, and saying, no, I want to take this to a different direction, even though I know it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of learning. It's okay. I'm going to do this thing because it does pay off, right? When you put in that effort. So you were recently picked up, one of your podcast episodes was picked up by, was it a local radio show or by some type of news network? I want to know all the details on that.
Oh, you're talking about the public access. In one of the podcasting groups, someone suggested that I get my show on public access TV, which I remember watching it when I was a kid. I'm just like, how do I get on that? And when he brought it up, it's like, oh, that would be kind of cool. And so I looked into it, my local area, and I Googled it. I did the research and I found the website and I reached out to them and I got like the form. I was ready to fill it out. And then I don't know, I just kind of put it to the side for like 6 months. And then I happened to have the email and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I submitted the form. I sent in the shows and they got put up. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Okay. My city is broken up into 5 boroughs. So when I realized how simple it was to just submit a show, I was like, oh, it's okay. I thought it would be difficult, but it's just as long as you meet the requirements, like, okay. So let me try to get the other 4 boroughs. And so the next one was the Bronx, which actually made me work a little bit harder for the video because I can't have anything blocking the logo and it has to be a certain frame rate. And, my videos weren't that. And so I had to convert it to that. And the person I was talking to was really nice in that he suggested a program called Handbrake, I think, that will convert the videos for you and for free. And so I downloaded that and did that. So I did the conversion. And, it's really funny too. They're funny with the time of the videos in that like it has to be either 58 minutes or 58 minutes and 30 seconds or 59 minutes, but like a lot of my videos are like 44 minutes and 45, and so it's like, oh. So the Brooklyn one was easier in that they'll just take it and I guess they fill it in with their sub videos, but then it was all the other boroughs that was like making me work hard. I know like the original video didn't work. And so, I went back to my simple video making program and I just so happened to have audio clips of other episodes that I've done. And so I inserted it and then I put it together. So now it's like I have to redesign a whole new show. So I had to do that. So now I'm being challenged in creating a whole new show, because of the rules of BronxNet. So I had to redo everything pretty much. And then Manhattan was in the next borough. It's pretty much the same as the Bronx, but because I already started making the shows, it's just putting it over there. And then Staten Island, that one is slightly more in that you have to add disclaimers and it has to be 59 minutes. Assuming you're going for the hour, that was a whole thing in itself. And then my last one, I'm trying to get Queens, but they recently told me it has to be a half hour or 29 minutes. So now I'm like, oh no. So now I'm dealing with that hurdle right now. So it's like, now I have to take my hour shows and knock it down to 29 minutes. And it's like, I don't know how to do that. So now I got to figure all that out. But I managed to get 4 out of 5 boroughs. I think it's definitely taking me on an editing journey in that the Brooklyn one was the easiest because they'll just take whatever. But it's the other 4 boroughs that's giving me a run for my money. So, but I think this being on public access TV, it is a new venture that I'm taking on. And, I was just watching one of my shows this morning and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. But yeah, I think, I know I kind of have this thought in the back of my mind, like, okay, it's public access. It's not exactly real TV, but I think the fact that it is TV and it's a start, it's a stepping stone. And I was just talking to another podcaster about it. He's like, oh, what you're doing is great. Keep going. And here's some other things you may want to consider. And there was another person talking to me about maybe you can put it on my platform. So it's a stepping stone for me in that I have to take what I've already created. I have to be creative and I have to add all these clips and these slides. And so it's taken me on another adventure. And I feel like every time I have this idea, it's a whole adventure I have to get on, right? So it's, starting my web series, and that took me on a whole consuming adventure, and then adding the audio part to my show and therefore calling it a podcast. So that's another adventure. And then the public access TV, and now that's a whole other adventure. And so every time I take on these new things, it's a whole thing I got to do. It's definitely interesting. And, it is something that I can point to and say, hey, look, I'm on TV, So it is in my local area for now, but, it's a start and it's another marketing plug for the guests that come on my show. And I say, hey, so-and-so's on TV, watch, so I feel like I have this intrusive thought in my head, like, it's only public access TV. Like, it's not real TV, but it's to step in the right direction. And, this can take you far if you kind of keep at it. And I think, because it forces you to edit these shows, and should another thing come along, you already kind of have it ready to go and you never know who's watching. So it's like, I constantly have to reassure myself this is a stepping stone. So, but yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to partake in, and the process is pretty simple. For my area, I'm trying to look into other areas, but I think it's like, because I realize that the process is simple, It's just, oh, let me see where else I can get into. So I am kind of curious to see how far I could go with it.
I love that so much. And thank you for sharing the intrusive thoughts, right? Because we definitely have them. You're not alone in that at all. It's like, is anybody listening to me? Probably not, but it's okay. I'm still going to show up. But really, like, if you think about it, the person who is listening, they might have a kid, a grandkid, a friend that they know, someone who needs your services. And they're like, oh, I heard someone talking about this the other day. Here you go. Like, go to this person's website. So I hope that happens for you. This has been so informational, and I feel like you've really given us a lot to consider, and your journey has just been so incredible. Like you said, it's been one adventure after another, but I'm sure looking back, it's like, I've learned just so much from this. Thank you so much. I want to know, as we kind of close out, where people can find you, hang out with you, watch your show. And we'll make sure we have links for that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Hot Topics. It's a very generic name, so I hope nobody copyrights it. But it's called Hot Topics. Look for the logo. It's a pencil with the black and gray tip. You can listen to the show wherever you get your podcast. But you could just type in my company name, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. Just do a search, and whatever podcast platform, you see the big yellow pencil, Hot Topics, that's what it is. So you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be in my area of New York City, you can watch my show in Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. So you can check it out on your public access station. The information is on my website. So, which you can check it out. My website is www.astepAheadTutoringServices.com. So that's the general website of all my tutoring services. astepAheadTutoringServices.com/Hot Topics Podcast. So if you go to that specific page, you will see all the information about where to watch it on TV. You can also watch all the videos and listen to the audio as well. But my tutoring services, if anyone is looking for any kind of tutoring services, whether it's one-on-one tutoring, college counseling, editing and proofreading, test prep, my company offers that as well. Go to the main website as well. Once again, www.astepAheadTutoringServices.com. And I'm also on social media. I'm all over the place.
Lovely. We'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes, the webpage as well as the podcast page, for anyone who's driving or unable to look at their phone right now or click on the link. So we'll make sure that we have that for you guys to go back to. Thank you so much for being on this show, Gabrielle. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at Alicia.Galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.